Namaste, my dear brothers and sisters. The love and blessings of the Mother and Sri Aurobindo to all of you. Sri Aurobindo was a prolific writer and started writing extensively right since his school and college days. And this continued for several decades. And his disciples had a tendency to reprint some of his earlier works, which they felt, with a lot of justification, were still relevant and required reading by a new generation of readers. So once it so happened that he had written something in 1910, and some of these booklets, which were published in 1910, were reprinted in 1937, 27 years later. So what we are going to see today is related to this reprinting of some of his 1910 booklets. When a revised edition of one of his booklets written in 1910 was published in 1937, a disciple of Sri Aurobindo's wrote a review of it that he sent to Sri Aurobindo for approval. Now, if a book published in 1910 is once again printed in 1937, there is a tendency to call it not just a reprint, but a revised edition. So the use of this word revised is not necessarily to be taken very seriously, as we shall see very soon. And one of the disciples then decided to write a review of one of these booklets, but before that review was published, he sent it to Sri Aurobindo for approval. Thank God he did. Let's see what Sri Aurobindo's response was. Yes, I have seen it. That is, I have seen the disciples' review, but I don't think it can be published in its present form. I know he's not being very dogmatic that it should not be published. All he's saying is, I don't think it can be published in its present form. Why? As it prolongs the political Aurobindo of that time into the Sri Aurobindo of the present time. In 1910, Sri Aurobindo didn't have this title Sri, and he was into politics. Of course, his politics always had a strong spiritual flavor, but he was in politics. And during this interval from 1910 to 1937, it's a long period, 27 years, he had passed through several phases from 1910, when he went to Pondicherry in April, till 1914, he was more or less in seclusion and engaged in his own personal sadhana, his personal spiritual quest, a deep spiritual quest, because in fact, he had reached a very advanced level of spiritual development even before he went to Pondicherry. But then he was rising to yet another level during these 4 years. So, after these 4 years of intense sadhana, by 1914, he was ready to share this knowledge, this wisdom with the world, and that he did through the Arya, which is the source of some of the major works of Sri Aurobindo. And this went on for more than 6 years. From 1914 through 1920, he wrote extensively in the Arya and then slowed down his writing a bit. But then it was during this period, after the mother arrived in 1920 for the second and the final time in Pondicherry, that the ashram started evolving or establishing itself, as Sri Aurobindo called. And formally, the ashram was established in 1926, when Sri Aurobindo attained yet one of more of his siddhis on the 24th of November. And after 24th of November 1926, Sri Aurobindo once again went into seclusion. And he had been in this seclusion for 11 years, from 1926 through 1937, when this booklet was reprinted. So you can see that how much progress Sri Aurobindo had made during these 27 years. And he was a very different type of person altogether now. He was a spiritual master, not someone engaged in political struggle, political activity for the freedom of the country. he had deliberately stepped back and kept himself away from such activity. And therefore, to reprint something that he had written in 1910 when he was engaged in the freedom struggle, uh, to in 1937 when he had evolved to become a spiritual master, was rather absurd. And if he had his way, probably he would not have even liked it to be reprinted. But all the same, that had been done. The disciples, keep doing such things. And but he didn't want this review because he felt that why drag him as he was in 1910 into the present. Then, in the review, the disciple had said that the book has been thoroughly revised. So Sri Aurobindo is telling this reviewer, you even assert that I have thoroughly revised the book, and these articles are an index of my latest views on the burning problems of the day. Now, the reprint itself probably had that word revised edition, and the reviewer added this adjective thoroughly, apparently innocuous, but to make it look still more impressive, that the revision has not been just a cursory revision, but a thorough revision. You will assert that I have thoroughly revised the book, and these articles are an index of my latest views. So instead of getting the views that he had in 1910, this book would now give you the latest views on the burning problems of the day. Now, the burning problems of the day in 1910 may not have been the same as in 1937. And then this disciple goes on to say in the review that there has been no change in my views, that is Sri Aurobindo's views, in 27 years. Now you can see a lot of uh, contradictions and casual sort of an approach here. Uh, on one hand, he's calling it a thorough revision without making sure how thorough the revision is. Probably he never compared the 1910 version with the 1937 version. Without comparing the two, he came to the conclusion that if it is a revision, it must have been a thorough revision. And if it has been a thorough revision, it would reflect the latest views. But at the same time, he believed that since his views were always perfect, they were perfect 27 years ago and they are perfect now, there could not be any change in those views. So they are the latest, but they are still the same as they were 27 years ago. And so he says that this revised edition is an index of Sri Aurobindo's latest views on the burning problems of the day, and there has been no change in my views, that is Sri Aurobindo's views, in 27 years. So then what is the thorough revision about if the views are the same? And if the views are different, the latest views are different from the previous views, then there must have been a change over these 27 years. But then Sri Aurobindo takes an exception, particularly to this, that there has been no change in my views in 27 years. And he says, which would surely be proof of a rather unprogressive mind. Because if somebody is progressing, there is sure to be some change. And in this particular context, consistency is not a great virtue. And therefore, he does not take it as a compliment that he has been consistent in his views. What his views were in 1910 continue to be also in 1937. So he does not take this consistency as a compliment, but rather takes an exception to it and says, which would surely be proof of a rather unprogressive mind. That is, it would indicate a mind which has been making no progress for 27 years. And then he's asking him, how do you get all that? Which means that there's quite a bit of imagination in it. It is not based on any facts, any thorough reading of the 1910 edition and the 1937 edition. Then Sri Aurobindo goes on to say, my spiritual consciousness and knowledge at that time was as nothing to what it is now. So both the spiritual consciousness and knowledge, spiritual consciousness expands knowledge, makes it wider, deeper, and higher. And as a result of his spiritual evolution, the knowledge had also expanded. And both these aspects, whether it is awareness or consciousness and knowledge, he says that at that time, that is in 1910, was nothing as compared to what it is now, that is in 1937. How would the change leave my view of politics and life unmodified altogether? So, if there has been a change, if there has been a progress, then how could the views be completely unmodified? There has been no such thorough revision. In fact, there has been no revision. As he says, I have left the book as it was. There has been no revision at all because it would be useless to modify what was written so long ago. Since his views had evolved so much over these 27 years, it would be quite useless to try and revise that book. Why not write a new book altogether? But then Sri Aurobindo never wanted to write a book on the same type of subjects on which he wrote in 1910, because now he was a spiritual master and was writing books and literature which was uh, much more sort of, which had nothing to do with politics. It was purely spiritual. Although, I mean, all his political writings also have a strong spiritual undercurrent, but now there was no politics in what he was writing. And therefore, he says that it would be useless to modify what was written so long ago. So the book is a reprint. Nothing has been changed. And his views certainly have changed. If at all, he has to express those views. But then he uh, took a conscious choice not to express these modified views on the on political affairs. That was a conscious decision. Is consistency not a virtue on the spiritual path? Yes, the aspiration should be consistent, the faith should be consistent, but not the consciousness, not the knowledge, not the view of life and the world. That doesn't have to be consistent. That evolves as the person evolves spiritually. So, in this context, what matters is what is true and right. So, truth overrides consistency altogether. Thank you.